On time. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm late somewhere, I'm sure.
Hey, Achilles.
Hi. So, my name is Micah Modell, right? And my background is actually as an instructional designer. I started off also as a software developer, building enterprise software systems. I did that for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. Arguably never really stopped doing that. And then I ultimately went for a master's degree in instructional design, development, and evaluation. And then my PhD is in instructional systems technology. All of this is not by way of bragging, but just to give you an idea of sort of where this comes from, and because it is actually relevant. My research focus is on collaborative learning, and specifically where collaboration goes wrong, right? This is not a research-focused presentation. There is a research-focused presentation that I recently delivered here. It's videotaped, it's online. You can mail me, and I will happily point you towards it. You can be viewer number 4 or 5. But the important thing is that this is going to be more focused on sort of application. So, in theory, right? Now that what should you expect to get out of this? First of all, what does collaboration offer? A lot of us are probably using collaboration in our classrooms. A lot of us probably see some value in it, but it's likely that a lot of us haven't really given a whole lot of thought to exactly what values it can offer and why we should be using it or why we shouldn't be using it, right? And one of the other things is we often don't think about the problems that can come up. And that brings me to the next piece of it, which is why is it challenging? What is difficult about using collaborative learning that that we should be aware of before we decide to use it or when we decide to use it? And then finally, what can we do about it? Now, this is clearly a presentation series on flipped learning, and so I will be tying that in this section, which is what's coming now. So my approach to this, sort of our agenda for the day, or for this hour, is going to be a brief synthesis of scholarship. I did not include citations in this. I have them. They're in published research articles, but again, I didn't want to distract people with that, so I left that out here. But I have them if anybody wants more materials. I'd be more than happy to give you more materials on that. Next, we've got an identification of what the challenges are that we're facing. And then a demonstration of something called CoLab, which is a system that I will explain and that I built and that I'll explain, and then a brief look at what are my anticipated next steps and my recommended next steps. I'm hoping that this will be interactive if it's warranted, so please don't hesitate to throw fruit or raise your hand and ask a question, whatever floats your boat. So what does collaboration offer? At this point, I'd like to make a brief statement with respect to flipped learning, right? I don't love the moniker flipped learning because the way that I think of it is more engagement learning, right? I mean, our goal is to engage our students in the process, in their own learning process. Now, flipping the classroom effectively speaks to that, and it sort of describes some of the things that we can do in order to actually make that happen. But I look at sort of the goal here is to engage our learners, right? Engage our students in the process of their learning so that they're not sort of, the traditional model of learning is they are the empty vessel, you know, the tabula rosa. And we as the instructors, we have all of the knowledge and we sort of pour that knowledge into them. And a lot of thinkers go in that direction, and a lot of our existing training techniques, the training techniques that we all experienced, at least in some part, were aligned with that, right? Sage on the stage, rather than, you know, but there's an alternative model, which would be sort of guide on the side, right? And with that guide on the side model, you're working to get them engaged so that they have to work in the classroom, they grapple with the topics, not me telling them how to think about it, but me challenging them to think about it, me trying to convince them to engage with these topics and to give them sort of that cognitive dissonance and give them those experiences of challenge, which will ultimately reinforce and lock in that understanding, right? I'm okay with my students going through a little bit of pain in my classroom because emotional, you know, the emotional resonance will help to lock in that knowledge and tie in that memory and code that memory a little bit stronger, actually a lot stronger. But that's not to say that I'm trying to make my students' experience painful, just for the record.
Just
Yeah.
a comment here for context. We started out, the president and the leadership were talking about flipped classroom. We deliberately adopted learning to throw out the idea that it's just brick and mortar classroom. And then, so for learning, I think that keeps the focus on learning, and it's very difficult to imagine learning without engagement and communication. But the way I see the broad context, this is all a response to the revolution in digital technology, the digital disruption that we're all living in. There are forms of collaboration now that were not possible 25, well, I think, 30 years ago, anyway, in the pre-internet era. So we're...
And I agree with you. I agree with you on that. There's certainly technology facilitates new modes of delivery, new modes of engagement, and I love hearing you say that, you know, you can't imagine learning without engagement. But for a long time, that wasn't on people's radar, right? That wasn't really on instructors' radar. It was mostly, I lecture, you listen, end of discussion, right? And then you regurgitate it, right? And a lot of us have had those experiences. Now, to your point, yes, it's very difficult to imagine the idea of going some, you know, of taking a different route, especially somebody who is steeped in these digital technologies, which facilitate so much.
Yeah, but I would even go so far as to argue that back in the old 20th century one-way lecture, one-way mass media model, it still required engagement, that the students who engaged are those who learned. The students who really engaged with the topic, they learned the most. Yeah.
So, so here's sort of my, you know, what's in it for me type of slide, right? Why is this important? Well, it's important because collaboration, you know, getting specifically into collaboration is, why do we use it, right? Well, and by a show of hands, how many of us have used group projects in our classrooms? Right, and how many of us, when we were students, were engaged in group projects?
Yeah.
Right? So we've mostly seen both sides of this, right? And why do we do this? As instructors, we do this because it provides an authentic view of what life is actually like, right? When I was out there in the corporate world, I was always working in teams. I was never doing things on my own, right? And I was always bothering people too, but I was always borrowing from other people, and always, you know, there was always that give and take. It also allows us to offer more complex problems, right? things that one person really couldn't be expected to do on their own. And then, feeding into that, the complexity also feeds into the diversity, right? The diversity itself complicates the problems, but it leads to a richer experience and to a greater appreciation for diversity. That is obviously, a big part of what's on our minds here at SUNY Korea. But in general, there's a big push in sort of the direction of diversity and inclusion as we go into a more global environment and work on more of a global stage. And then there's a lot to be gained. One strong mechanism of engagement is learning by teaching. If you go back to Vygotsky, but not just Vygotsky, others have talked about it as well. He was just sort of one of the early people to talk about it, right? To actually be writing about it. It's sort of the idea of working with a more competent other. But that more competent other doesn't have to be more competent across the board. They know this topic better, and they wind up teaching it to you. So your skill improves, but by teaching it to you, they are reviewing those neural pathways and reinforcing those neural pathways and strengthening them and exploring them more deeply so that they actually understand it better as well. So by providing our students with collaborative projects, we're actually giving them the opportunity and saying, and we're actually saying to them, don't come to me, go to your teammates, and your teammates will help you with this. And I actively do that in order to get them teaching each other. And I say, and then if it's still muddy, then definitely come to me. But, and then finally, this is, maybe we shouldn't have that on here. All right.
I was going to question that too.
Higher quality feedback.
I was ready to jump on that one.
But in reality, there are a number of instructors that do engage in group work. You have 100, 200 students in your classroom, right? And
Absolutely.
You can,
I think there's nothing wrong with the reduction in grading load. Any professor, I would challenge anybody, they have a class of 50 or more, dividing into teams of 5 or 6, how they're going to sit there individually without using some form of peer evaluation, and give an honest grade.
And realistically,
I just don't think it's possible.
Realistically speaking, if you get 100 papers coming in, is that 100th paper or the 99th paper getting the same quality review that your first one did? Are you paying as much attention to it as the first one? I mean, let's face it, we're human, right? But if you can reduce that load by a factor of 4, then you can spend more time giving them what you have to offer that's of value, which is your expertise and your feedback. So yeah, it is reduction in grading load, and that is really nice for us, but it's also really nice for the students.
You could actually do things with that number 5, because I think in addition to incorporating peer evaluation and changing the whole, rather than emphasis on grading, emphasis on actual learning and learning outcomes as the end result, rather than a grade as we've traditionally thought of it. Yeah.
So hopefully at this point, you're sold at least on being interested in learning a little bit more.
So are you intentionally making a differentiation between grading and feedback? Because, being devil's advocate, you could say grading is kind of feedback. It's just more.
Yeah, well, because
student.
I've never heard an instructor complain to me, "Oh man, I've got to write all this feedback this week," and they say, "Oh man, I've got to do all this grading," right? But when you raise a good point. No, they're absolutely they're two sides to the same coin. But when I present it to my students, I am very careful to emphasize the feedback side of it rather than the grading side of it. Because they're always going to be focused on the grade anyway. Oh, did I get a B plus? Did I get an A minus? Can I please get a few more points? Did you look at why you lost the points? Can you address that? Right? I mean, that's sort of the big element of it as well. And actually, I don't go into a tremendous amount of detail on this, within this presentation on feedback, but these are sort of the, you know, so some of the themes. It's definitely a topic I would be happy to talk about. But the ones that I actually focus on in this slide, or sorry, in this presentation, are really 2 through 4, right? Sort of the complex and challenging problems, the diverse perspectives, and the learning by teaching. So why is all of this stuff difficult, right? Why is the you know, using collaboration in your classroom, why is it difficult? Well, does this look familiar? You know, we see our students, they're in a group, right? They're working together, and then one of your students comes up to you with a little story that's what was actually going on, right? Or maybe that was what was going on. Is this important? Does this matter? I think every one of us, and from my research, every one of us is thinking, wow, I want to do what I can to help out that student because they clearly are going to be uncomfortable, right? Those students are going to be pissed that this person is not doing his work, and these people aren't going to feel like they're going to feel kind of like robots. But
the left-hand one looks a little bit like President Trump in a group.
Perhaps.
Well, exactly like him. He shoves the prime minister aside. He's the alpha male. He's always, you know, up front. Yeah. So very important.
But why is this important outside of their social interactions? Well, when you have a situation like this, at least in theory, I mean, in my classrooms, and I imagine it's the same in yours, I don't just give out homework because I like giving out homework. I don't give out the assignments because I want to see them being busy, right? I give them these assignments because I think that there's value in them executing on these assignments, and he's not. And to compound things, at the end, I'm probably giving them all the same grade. And so when I get finished with that student and hand him off to Mark, Mark thinks that they all earned an A. And he might have the skills, but quite honestly, I don't know. I just don't. I can't.
Later, I'll mention a tactic that I've thought of that I'm using twice, and we'll see if it worked well last time. But go ahead.
I'd be very interested in hearing
Yeah,
about it. Yeah.
And then just a note that from my experience, most of the groups, students do identify the social loafer.
Social loafing or free rider, yeah.
They do actually, it comes out over the course of the semester. Yeah.
But then usually they feel like they have to deal with it, right? They usually feel like, well, they have to work it out. And usually I don't hear about it until the second to last week of the semester, or the third to last week of the semester. And then what can I really do? I could punish him, sure, but what problem does that solve? Does that help them? Does it help him? He's walking out of it thinking, oh, I got a slap on the wrist. Okay, that's annoying. And they're thinking, wow, I don't want to work in groups again. And that again came out in my research. We don't want to work in groups. That's one of the primary learnings that we're getting from assigning group work, right? And this one comes with its own problems. So, you know, when that comes up, who do you trust? He's telling me, and he looks trustworthy, and maybe I've had some other interactions with him, but is it enough to punish the other person? Right? And even if you do decide that you trust this person, maybe you've even seen some of these interactions where this other person is bullying everybody else, or where some guy is just not showing up. What do you do about it? From a learning perspective, what do you do about it? Right? Because if you give them some kind of a punishment, again, where are they going to take that? You know, they're going to be thinking, oh, well, at least I passed, maybe. Or they're going to think, I take it again, but I didn't really tell them what the problem was. And I certainly didn't give them any tools to help them resolve those problems or identify those problems. And then, did the person have any reason to know that their behavior was inappropriate? And was it really just them anyway? Didn't the rest of the group play a part in it? Can you really resolve a group problem by addressing an individual? Some people would say, yeah. I would clearly, from my framing, I would say no. I think you need to address the entire group. And you need to make sure that your expectations are clear. And, that's in order to make sure, do they actually even understand the problem? Could they recognize it if they run into it again? And then, what will happen next time? Right? These are all problems that arise from using group work. So what can we do? Well, what I've done is, as I said, being a software developer, this is not necessarily the sort of thing that everybody's going to go out and do tomorrow, but I built a system, a little web-based system, which is called CoLab Online, CoLab.online, and you guys can all explore it. If you send me your email, then I can actually deploy one of these, basically an experience, which we'll get to in just a moment. And it potentially provides them with what I believe to be in support for some engaging activities to enhance engagement while taking advantage of collaboration. It offers self and peer assessment, which was sort of the root of my goal, and then some instructor support and hopefully group composition components coming later. Not yet, but these are all things that I do want to talk about. And so I'm going to pop out of this and go over to CoLab.
While you're doing that,
Yeah.
I've been using a very powerful online peer evaluation system called Teammates, developed by computer science folks down at National University of Singapore. I recommend you look at that as well as CoLab, and if you find any others later,
we put on the website.
Put it up on our Flip Learning web resources page. Yeah.
So you come in, you would actually, in most cases, you would get an email from the system, but on behalf of the instructor, saying you're being invited to take part in this class. Please go ahead and sign up. And you can use Google in order to do your sign up, and that way you're logged in and you don't have to type in username and password. That's actually really nice. So I come in here and I see that I have no tasks available, right? Because I'm an instructor and I'm the administrator and I'm not taking any classes, so I don't have any tasks available. But if I did, it would look a little bit more slowly like this. And it's difficult to see, but basically this is and actually, here, let's show that. So this is a self and peer assessment task, and this one is a terms list task, right? The self and peer assessment piece is basically on a weekly basis, every student in the class, right? What I do is I go in and I assign students into teams, and then I create this assessment. And every week, and it's customizable in a number of ways, but the way that I have it set up for me is every week on Friday morning, they will get an email saying, do your self and peer assessment. And they will keep getting an email every morning until Monday, unless they go ahead and complete their assessment. Assuming they come in, they'll be met with something that looks like this, and I just hit on Superstars, which is the name of their group, and then it comes to a screen like this. And on this screen, well, sorry, there are some instructions up top, but then you go down and you see these are the categories right now. Now, I'm currently in process of updating that. That'll be in, I'll talk about that briefly in next steps. But this is the set of things that I'm asking them to evaluate their group on. And I'm very careful to say you're evaluating your group, because when I open this up, it looks like I'm evaluating the members. I'm not. I'm evaluating the group, right? And the way that that shows up is these are my 4 group members, right? Including me. And if you'll notice, this is about 25% of the way in. Not about, it's exactly 25% of the way across, right? Because there's 4 people in the group, so only 100% of whatever got done could possibly have got done. But maybe I know that I was kind of slacking this week, and I was late on a lot of things. So I'm gonna say that I didn't do such a great job at organizing. And if you notice, when this one goes down, these others go up in order to compensate. And maybe Roberta, she's really a fantastic leader, and so I'm gonna put hers up. And that was for organizing, but I'm more of a creative type, yes.
Just went into session, so you're asking people to self-evaluate themselves and everybody else in the group on that metric, not just,
Yes.
okay, that's, I thought
Yes.
that was not
Yeah,
clear,
that's
okay.
a real nice interface.
Okay.
An alternative, if you do it weekly as Micah does, that's a lot of these, but I've done it for, on average, like during a semester, 15 weeks, I have, say, 7 major assignments. So just every 2 weeks, I've done this type of thing, but not with this. I like the group.
So one of the nice things about this is that I really focused, part of my background and my minor in the PhD level was human-computer interaction design. And I really focused on trying to optimize the student experience so that this would be quick, so that they wouldn't hate doing it. And my response rates are actually quite high. Actually over the course of about 2 semesters, I haven't looked at anything here, but over the course of about 2 semesters, I had a response rate of about 90%.
Do you get groups where they obviously, even if you tell them to do it confidentially, that
They all go
rate
ahead
themselves
and leave it that way? Yeah, and I'm
automatically?
fine with it.
Yeah.
I am perfectly fine with it. Because my feeling is that when the rubber hits the metal, rubber hits the road.
Road,
When it hits
yeah.
something, then people will get upset and then they'll let their true feelings out. Especially if I've normalized this over the course of the semester and they are doing it over the course of the semester and they realize that 1 week is just 1 data point. And they feel a little bit more comfortable being honest because, first of all, they know I'm asking for it. They know I want to do it. And it's really important when you set this up, to set this up not as summative, but as formative. I always tell them, I say, first of all, I'm looking for trends, not blips, right? Your cat dies, you get upset, and you miss class or you miss an assignment. It happens, right? It's happened to all of us. That's not what I'm looking for. When you check out for 3 weeks in a row, you're gonna hear from me. Your whole group is gonna hear from me because I'm gonna wanna see what I can do to resolve that and to help you identify what the problems are so that you can resolve them, right? That's the goal here. I'm not looking at this, and one of the big differences between this system and a lot of the other systems is that I'm not, originally I set out to derive a grade from it and to derive a number for it. I have the data to do it, but ultimately I just didn't bother. Because I realized if I'm collecting this data over the course of the semester, and we get to the end of the semester, and there's a problem, and I haven't done anything with it, whose fault is that? Is that their fault, or is that mine? I should be intervening. And so one of the goals longer term is to be able to identify these things programmatically so that it can mail me and say, this group's having a problem. You probably want to talk to them. And then they would go ahead and they would, submit, they would complete all of them. There's even a comments box at the bottom, but it's hidden as much as I could. They asked for it, but I don't want it. I don't want to have to read it, to be honest. And so I've always told them, I said, you can certainly submit them and I will read them, but I've hidden it because I really don't want them, what do I want with the qualitative information? What I really want is the quantitative information that the computer can look at. And that the computer can then, and now that you've seen sort of the source data, now let's go ahead and take a look at reports. Okay, the most interesting of the reports tends to be this group report. And you'll have to bear with me because these are all anonymized, and so I don't remember which one is which. So I just have to play around a little bit. We're going to start off with this first one. And yeah, this one's not an interesting one. Give it a moment. Oops.
Can you explain in words what you're doing, actually?
Yes.
Okay.
So, sorry, and you can't even see all of what's
too blurry
on
for
screen
me,
anyway, because it goes a little bit past. Basically, what this is, okay. This is reporting. This is my way as an instructor. The students don't have access to this. I've been asked about that. Ultimately, I would like to give them some form of access to this data, but for now, I think it's most appropriate for it to be filtered through the instructor. Because I'm not expecting the students to do something about it all on their own. I just don't think that that's realistic.
Do you directly apply the result to the grade?
I don't.
Oh.
And then that's what I was saying. I could, but I just never even bothered doing that math because I started realizing that it was a lot more helpful to me to be following this throughout the semester and trying to approach it throughout the semester rather than punitively at the end, right? I do sort of sometimes holistically look at it, and if it came to it, I'm one person, but at some point maybe, I'm sure I would be asked to build out that functionality. I just haven't done it yet because it's not the focus. So what this is going in, and here, this is going in and saying that this is one particular class that I have. Basically, the system looks at things in terms of projects because you might potentially be in a class with multiple projects where you're working in different groups. It would be probably very confusing, but it's possible. But it looks at everything as projects, and you've got the Cook Island Project Manager, which is a bad title, but it was randomized. And then we've got, this is the name of the group itself. And this is the performance. And you'll see, we've got Catherine Tucker, Willie Ross, Joseph Olson, and Adam Bowman, and you can see they're color-coded. So you can see how they're doing. I have some others on here that are a little bit more interesting, right? This one indicates to me that Craig Hart was maybe having some problems over here, right? Maybe there was something up with that. If I go into yet another one, right? Again, and this group actually, if I'm not mistaken, basically fell apart. Ultimately wound up not, basically started off with, I think, 3 members, and then one of the members didn't continue or something and wound up disbanding the group. And you can see, clearly, there were problems.
So you're showing us data from your personal experience or a class?
Anonymized.
Anonymized, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and modified as well.
Okay.
What's the vertical axis?
Yeah, so those sliders, I do that so that you don't actually think of people as numbers, but ultimately, they're numbers. I have it basically from 0 to 6,000. If you had your bar all the way at the end here, it would be at 6,000. And so this is just basically points. It's not meaningful in and of itself, it's really the relationship. Good question.
You're talking about the previous 4 red bars where you slide the circle
Yes.
across it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and then I can even delve into individuals. I don't want to spend too much time on this because there are some other things, some other components that I want to show as well. But this gives you an idea. This is sort of the most powerful piece that I have, you know, this sort of self and peer assessment piece, because it's automated and because it's designed to be very low impact on the students and to become habituated so that they can come in and yeah, they can go ahead and you know, go ahead and I assume that it's going to be equal, and if they just hit submit, they're saying everybody worked comfortably together this week. That's fine by me.
In that line, I saw that before. You see at the line of 13th of May that the line goes down and back or something? You shouldn't be
Yeah,
progressing
there
all
are
the
some.
time?
There are some.
It's
bugs.
glitches.
Yeah.
What's the y-axis? I can't. You might have labeled it, but it's missing.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that's just points.
Okay.
4K. Actually, the max is 6,000 points.
Okay.
And the reason why I used 6,000 is because I'm assuming between 3 and 5 people per group, and that breaks up nicely and allows for nice smooth increments, basically whatever the width of the screen happens to be. So, you know, not particularly exciting answers.
It's not a percentage of the time that they've used. It's your
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I'm not expecting them, and I'm expecting them to eyeball it, and I'm expecting them to give me their perceptions, right? So part of what I'm expecting to see later on when my analyses get more sophisticated is, when do these things start to diverge, right? That should indicate a problem. When somebody is trending up or trending down, you know, either way, that indicates a problem. If they're trending up, that means that they're overperforming and potentially cruising for a burnout, right? If they're trending down, then they're potentially the social loafer.
But the trending down would be the subjective view of all the people in the team, including themselves of themselves.
Yeah, and if it's consistent,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
And either way, I'm not looking to take myself out of the picture. I'm still the instructor. I still need to be there. This is intended to give me insight into what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's intended to give me feedback from them in a manageable way, right? In a way that I can actually use.
And then do you intervene? And
Yes. Yes, I do. Yeah, when I see something, if I saw something like this, then I would be reaching out. Yeah, definitely.
What would be interesting, I think, I don't know if you, I mean, this is obviously a very, very interesting work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
And congratulations on summarizing in a simple chart like that the whole story of, you know, a semester's collaboration. Yeah, without words. I mean, it's easy to say that, but I'm sure it's really hard to design. But what would interest me is having a functionality that you would have a line which is based on the average subjective view of all the other people about one person. So say you have 4 people,
Yeah,
then you
and
have
that's
2, 3, 4 average subjective view of number 1, or
yeah, and that's what this one is.
That one
so,
is.
So the one below it,
Okay.
yeah, the one below it was the group,
Okay.
and this one I probably scrolled up when you weren't looking.
Okay.
I'm really curious, is that,
And then I can
bug
break it out by behavior too.
where it goes down and backwards, that bug, is that like a data entry thing, or what caused the,
Basically, the way that
Yeah.
so everything's in a SQL database, and I'm selecting it, and basically I'm selecting from this object up here
Yeah.
down to the objects below, and then I'm sorting through from this object, and really what I want is to sort this object into these objects. I know it's not a really
Okay,
great answer
all
for
right.
you, but I have to. Yes, there are definitely areas that need improvement, and quite frankly, that reporting
it's in the
code.
code,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
That's
no,
a good. It's in
there's
the
no-
code.
there's no good-
Well, it's in the code, the bug is in the code,
and one of the
not
other
in
things
the, not
is,
in the data.
4 words.
as you point out, also is that yes, this is actual data, but it is anonymized, and that functionality is built in as well, right? So let's go back to the main screen. So this is sort of the self and peer assessment piece of things, and we are at 40. Okay, so another piece of interest is, so now we're able to sort of assess people throughout the semester, right? But one of the things that still seem to be missing is any learning about groups, right? We don't really teach people much, and we certainly don't teach people consistently about how best to operate in groups. And there's really not a whole lot of literature on that. You know, there's sort of a lot of literature on how groups should be run well, but there's not a whole lot on how to fix it when it's going problematic, right? And so one of the things that I do is at the beginning of my semester and at the end of the semester, I have people work through an experience. And actually that's in here. Sorry, it's a little slow. It's okay. So yeah, Azkaban prison is apparently. Oh yeah. Anyway, so.
Are you sure these are anonymized? No, I'm just joking.
So anyway, so let's go ahead into this one. And this is sort of the admin interface that only instructors and administrators would actually have access to. So security is considered throughout. Clearly, from the beginning, it's a multi-user system, right? And this is sort of the details and how you would set up a course. And then there are objects, you know, there are sort of components like projects and, well, there's bingo games. We'll talk about that in just a moment. There are projects, and then there are experiences, right? The project is basically the object that contains those self and peer assessment pieces. And then there's this experience piece. And if we go in here, this actually grows more or less directly out of my dissertation. It's actually a version of the dissertation study right here, or the instrument for the dissertation study right here. And we can go in here and I deploy 2 of these per semester, one at the beginning and one at the end. And what it really is, and I can't show it to you because I don't have a demonstration of it, but it asks students to come in and read through basically a full semester worth of group work experience, written from the perspective of one member of a team, right? This is in anticipation of the experience that they're about to embark upon, right? It's a simulation of how their experience could potentially go. And right now, I've got 3 different possible scenarios, right? We've got a social loafing scenario, we've got a group domination scenario, and then we've also got an equal participation scenario where, you know, it's still got ups and downs, but it's basically equivalent contributions. And it's 14 weeks. They basically read through this, and it takes maybe 15 minutes to half an hour. They read through what happened. They basically read through that journal entry for the week, and then they're asked to review. All right, was this group saying that it was primarily, that it was, you know, do you think that this group was experiencing group domination? Were they basically doing okay? I actually have a red herring in there as well called ganging up on the task. And then, or maybe it was social loafing. And then at the very end, I asked them, over the entire 14 weeks, what was happening? You know, if you had to go back and say, was this group basically healthy, or were they having problems, right? And if they were having problems, here's the key. How could you potentially fix that?
Your overall diagnosis, where do those terms come from? You assign that after looking at the data yourself?
This is the diagnosis that they assigned, and if it matches, so
they have a choice of diagnoses to choose among.
So this person was looking at the social loafing one, and they said that it was group domination. Okay, and yes, I give them it's a multiple choice. Okay. It's a multiple choice, and they have options for other, where they would write in a response, and they also have choices for I don't know, right?
This person didn't do very well. Missed every one.
There were a bunch of misses. But even more important to me is coming in here. This is their suggestions based upon that based upon the scenario that they read. Their suggestions for the person, more or less work for you. More I don't know what that means, but regardless, it's
Take that
something,
advice.
Yeah.
You get, no, we can't scroll down, or maybe you can scroll down, but if you get someone who's this, like a
So
vast
this is
majority
actually
of them.
this is actually a class.
Yeah, okay. So someone misses a lot of them. Do you suspect that that person is just, I gotta get this done, so and submitting it without?
No, I haven't actually. That might be happening, but the responses that I'm getting, it's not actually sort of a super easy. You have to actually select something. So I mean, yes, it could be, but that's not my.
But you select by just clicking, right?
Yeah, well, you have to pull it down from a drop down, and then click through it. Actually, what the reds mean here to me is that we don't really understand group work, right? What it tells me is actually that our students aren't really good at recognizing when there's actually a problem and when it's normal. That's really what those
So
red marks.
what do your
because they haven't been trained on this.
What are your colors indicating then? Yeah.
My
Green.
colors are indicating that they said this,
Good.
but the scenario itself was actually designed to be that.
Okay. Okay.
If they match it up, if they agree with the scenario, it's a green.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Green
in
doesn't
this
mean
case-
good. That's like green. Green.
Red.
Okay. That's
Green
not.
is
That
the
wasn't
match.
clear in what you're saying. I understand now. Okay.
It was
Yeah.
clear, but
But I thought green meant good. And social loafing, good. You know, and red, you know,
you can see the two
bad.
columns.
Yeah. So that's basically the way that the system works. And I use this, as I said, in the beginning of the semester and then at the end of the semester. And the idea is really to get them talking about what can happen in groups and how they can prepare themselves and how they can address it more effectively in the future, right? Ultimately, what I really want to do is integrate that self and peer assessment piece and basically say, okay, read through this week, how would you rate each other, right? In order to get a baseline so that I can then carry through and gain some insight into some people say, you know, this is bad, and some people say it's this bad, right? But if you're looking at the same week, then hopefully I can do some normalization there. But that's, again, future work. And then I want to come back. We're at 48, so
You can go
We'll
on.
go through this. We'll go through this quickly. But going back into the demo, one of the things, so how many of us use a textbook of some kind or assign readings of some kind in our classes? Right? Yeah, most of your hands are raised, except for Fahim. He apparently uses no readings in his classrooms.
He mind melds with his.
But anyway, so you know you're assigning these readings, and again, by a show of hands, how many of you would say that 100% of your students read all of the texts that you send out? That's what I thought, right? No, for the record, no hands raised, right? And it happens, and it's not that it's not understandable, right? First of all, these texts are challenging, right? Also, I look at these texts and I think, wow, that's really exciting, but I also have a background in it, right? This is stuff that I've chosen to study. I get it, and sometimes they need a little bit of help, right? And I get that too. So one of the things that I tried to do is, in order to sort of engage them a little bit more in the task, was I started building out a game of bingo. And what I have them do is, you know, I assign a chapter, and in the lead up to the class, I have them read through the chapter and pull out 10 terms that they think of as important, right? And that's this piece, this what is collaboration, and actually I'll give you the type, is a terms list submission. And they come in, sorry, I don't know why. But they come in here and they will, I think I know why, but regardless, they'll come in here and they will enter in their text, basically their term and then a little definition of the term. And then the term and then a little definition of the term. And they do that, I think, 2 days prior to the actual class, and then I take a day, I review all of those terms, remove duplicates, remove the ones that are not any good, right, or that are incorrect, or whatever, in some way problematic. The ones where the terms are okay, but maybe they're plagiarized, right, directly ripped from the text, I put that in there as well. And when I do that, I then save that back, and they get a distilled version. And sometimes I assign it to a more standardized term, right, which is sort of the concept. And then they get, and this I should be able to show. They get as I said, a more standardized version of the okay, so here's the response data. And actually, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of information on here. Notice plagiarized. We got 12% plagiarized, 10% plagiarized, and basically it gives me an interface where I can go through and read through all 350 or all 12, however many terms came in, and I can sort them and resort them so that I can actually see what the terms are, what words they're giving me, and if the text from one matches exactly the text from the next one, then I'm pretty sure that it wasn't their doing.
Does the software allocate and decide what is plagiarized and not
No,
plagiarized?
I do that.
You personally have
I
looked
do
at
that
everything.
manually.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also gives me the ability to see what things are they still fuzzy on, right? Because I'm also able to look at their definitions, and if they come up with a definition that's incorrect, then that means that I need to go into the classroom and sort of prod them on it. Does this make sense, right? Explain it a little bit more effectively.
How do you get such a tightly numbered percentage of plagiarism? 12, 10, 4? I mean,
because I go through and I label them, and it just says what percentage of the total that they submitted.
The total number of things used. Oh, I
did
understand.
I mark as plagiarized?
Not within a particular definition, but the total number of things you've asked them. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then these are the actual concepts that were pulled out during this particular semester, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the next stage on this, which it takes a little bit more time, so I haven't done it yet, but in class, I then have them play bingo, right? They're listening for me to talk about that topic in class, and then they mark it off on their little game board. I haven't built out the game boards. I tell them to. I gave them a little template, and they're right now supposed to write it down, and they do. And the cool thing about this is that I get them directing the conversation to the words that they put on their bingo board.
And anticipation is a very good tool, I think, for attention like that. They're waiting for you to drop it just one time, maybe. And
I've had people, sometimes asking about terms that are not necessarily the most appropriate for the topic at hand, but it also allows me to say, this is actually not related, but I understand why you might think it was, because that's actually this, and this is actually this other thing, and sort of the bridge from here to there doesn't actually connect, but it could look like it would, right? And here's why. And it allows for them to, first of all, they've read the text at least 2 days in advance, right? Because they had to they had an assignment due. And then and it also means that they are engaged in the classroom. They're actually involved, and they're trying to listen and make sense of what I'm saying. Because I don't say, I have to say these words. I say I have to talk about this idea, right? I have to talk about this concept, and if I talk about this concept, then you can use it, right? Then I'll give, and if they get bingo, I tell them, and they forget because, they're polite, but I tell them, if you get bingo, you immediately raise your hand and say bingo. They usually wait until I'm done. But then I have them stand up and explain to me what are the concepts and when did I talk about them? What do they actually mean? And they do it. And I have my students actually doing this, right? As I said, the next stage on this is for me to generate those bingo boards and to have that basically co-opt the phone. So that way, yes, I want you using your phone in the classroom. Because if you flip away from my game, then it's, kind of defeating the purpose. You're not going to get your points, right? So these are some of the things that I've been doing so far in order to sort of increase engagement in the classroom. And, using your own software in the classroom is, not always the best approach. I mean, it works well, but it also, comes with its own, its own challenges. But then there's one other thing, because I promised that I would address a few of these things. One of the other pieces of it is sort of, if you're trying to get diversity, then you kind of want to make sure that you have diverse groups. But the research shows that people rebel against having their groups assigned. But if you let them choose their groups entirely on their own, then they come up with pretty crappy groups, right? Because then they just work with their friend and it doesn't actually work out well. So there's a happy medium. And what I've done is, teams will ideally comprise 4 students. You can select your own team members, but as diversity, and here I am telling you what I am valuing, right? Diversity is often viewed as beneficial to a creative team's product. You have to have at least 20 diversity points, and here's how. So, for every different hometown represented, you get 1 point, right? So if you have 3 people from Seoul, that's 1 point. If you have 3 people from Seoul and 1 person from Konak, that's 2 points, right? If you have more than, basically for each country that you have represented, you get another 2 points, right? I'm incentivizing them to pull in people who they might not have normally pulled in, right? Gender. If you can find, if you're a guy and you can work with a girl, great. If you can find a trans person, 6 points right there, right? And then with age, I'm not sure how well this one works, but I had them also, I give them the standard deviation on the age, which, I mean, it should be told that this class actually uses Excel extensively, so that's kind of self-serving, right? I have them then enter their terms, or their ages into a little Excel spreadsheet and then run a standard deviation formula on those terms. So it's a little bit self-serving, but it's also helpful, right? Because, I mean, having people, having a diversity within age also helps to give diverse perspectives. And then, year level presented, there are tweaks that I'm potentially, I make tweaks to it every semester, and maybe I might want to raise the number of required diversity points, but the point is that the students still have autonomy, just not that much autonomy, right? I mean, they still get to control it within the parameters that I've set. And it meets up with sort of the best of both worlds.
And you can adjust the parameters as you go too. It's not that's the numbers can be adjusted based on your opinion of how it works or doesn't work ongoingly. Yeah.
Exactly. And so this will ultimately get integrated into CoLab as well to help me to measure this. I'm not sure exactly how I want to do that yet, but that's something that I look to do. And there are some other mechanisms that I might integrate as well. So, what's next? Well, clearly what's next is my... All right. So, some assistance with respect to group composition, which I just explained. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh. some refinements, further refinements to self and peer assessment. The reporting needs to be improved. I think all see the power that reporting potentially offers, right? Has the potential to offer. And especially with research behind it, if I can actually predict an emerging group problem so that you can intervene and say, hey, you might want to check out this documentation on social loafing. Not saying you're having that problem, but you might be, right? Or assign them to complete a web-based training. And maybe even the system can say, hey, do you want to send out this web-based training to these people? Because they look like they're having this problem. Yeah, check it out, let me know, I'll just wait here, right? And then predictions would be huge. You know, the ability to actually predict what, to not just understand what's going on in the group, but predict what is trending. And that brings me to the end. How's my timing?
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, very good. Well, it's a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of inspiring ways to encourage teams, groups, and document it, as well as to manipulate and constantly adjust it too. I mean, that's the interesting point. It's very open. I mean, it's a very structured structure. To repeat myself, very structured arrangement, but at every point you can intervene and alter the data points, the weights of different things you're measuring. So I think that's interesting feedback. So feedback in your own system, instead of locking you into one particular version of doing this, every point I noticed you could constantly put a different weight on it, and for the next time you adjust it, maybe even in the future allow professors themselves to set different weights on the way they measure something.
And that's, and to your point, yes, I would agree with that. And the way that I look at it is actually a little bit different from that. There's definitely a trend, you know, within a frequent trend and assumption and everything within the instructional design industry, but you know, sort of across the board, that you know, these tools are going to make instructors obsolete. I don't agree with that. I think that these tools need to be designed to help us, to give us the information that we need in order to do our jobs better than we were doing it yesterday. You know, to continually improve upon. But I don't for a second think that the goal is to get the instructor out of the classroom. Instead, my goal is to allow the instructor to focus in the classroom on what they're good at, right? And quite frankly, the research says we're not very good at this, right? So instead of making you good at it, why don't I help?
Just for the record, I've had 3 semesters worth of experience with just pure random assignment of teams, and I haven't gotten any negative feedback from students on that. And maybe that, I was thinking, but an alternative that you presented, you might consider adding years of residence or study or residence abroad to your diversity index.
That's a good idea.
Because we have a lot of overseas Korean students.
Yeah.
And if they've spent a long time learned another language, that is going to add a distinct element, a very important one to measure on diversity.
Yeah,
given our student body makeup.
Maybe months or years lived outside of home country or something like that. And one of my goals for this is to sort of not try to lock it into a particular location, but
sure.
But I see what you're saying. Yeah, I like that. I think that.
Well, and the reality is we have a majority Korean and overseas Korean students, and to split them that way would add to the diversity index.
Another thing to note is that if you're interested in sort of seeing what the experience is like, right, that simulated group work experience, send me an email. I can certainly assign you to one, and you can work through it and see what that's like. But then the other thing is, if you're interested in using any of these tools or all of these tools in your classroom, again, talk to me, because it was designed to enable other people to access it. So all of those reports, you would be able to access those reports for your classes and your classes alone. I can see every class because I need to be able to see every class.
Well, yeah, if I can just bring this back to the broad discussion of the flipped learning initiative at SUNY Korea. Some of you have already had good suggestions, and you know, Micah comes in with programming experience, so he's able to do some specialized things. But I guess you all got my email that I sent as a Vice President for Academic Affairs, and I just wanted to comment that in order to implement flipped learning as a best practice at SUNY Korea effective this fall semester, we've got to do it in a way that does not infringe upon academic freedom. That is the responsibility or the ability of the instructor to determine how he or she teaches a particular subject or how he teaches. Because after all, if I step back and say, well, what's the purpose of this flipped learning initiative? And President Kim, his answer is, the purpose is to improve education, to improve learning. And what kind of learning? Well, the direction of SUNY Korea is aimed at training future history makers who can change the world. So that the emphasis is on real world problems. All four out of our 5 departments now, except for business management, are in the College of Applied Engineering or Engineering and Applied Sciences. So applied means real world. I mean, these engineers like to solve problems, deal with, and so do social scientists, so do people in the humanities for that matter. But I think what you touched on at the beginning, Micah, is the key here, that we look at this flipped learning initiative not in a narrow sense, but as an opportunity to improve learning in the classroom in a way that we forget about walls between industry, whether it's POSCO across the street or Samsung Biologics down the street or Genesem across, or some company in Seoul or in the US or anywhere in the world. Industry, international organizations. I mean, think in terms of flipped learning as the way I look at it, in a simple way, is just that it's a response to the environment in which we're living. We're all carrying smartphones that are more powerful than the computers that most of us used in graduate school, or at least by far or the Apollo moon mission didn't have nearly as much computing power as I've got in my phone. And so I'd like to, in the time remaining, since we have this group here, if anybody has questions, I mean, Mark and I are going to be meeting with President Kim later this afternoon to give him a progress report on the flipped learning initiative. We're basically going to go through sort of an update on these sessions, an update on the website, which will be published within the next...
about 2 weeks, I got, yeah.
Pardon?
End of the semester, 2 weeks. I meet Minsu Park 2 more times at least.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can publish it at least at the beginning of that last week, before anyone leaves, and send a note out with that, because we want faculty to start looking at that. That's going to be an internal website as a repository for resources on flipped learning. And Mark and Minsu Park, who's been working as an RA, have done a good job mocking up the site. I mean, it's a nicer looking site than the ones that I use typically for teaching courses. But with Google Sites, it's really easy to put up a website. And so we're going to go over these sharing sessions, the website, and then we're going to get a short baseline survey out, a sort of shortened version of the one you saw earlier, but touching on some just what I'm calling, what Mark and I are calling just building blocks of flipped learning. Because if you start talking about definitions of flipped learning, you get into a long discussion citing this research, that research, and we're not doing this just because it's a buzzword. I think we are going into the flipped learning initiative at SUNY Korea as part of the overall venture to set up a new paradigm for education here, not just here in Korea, but for the whole world. I take Dr. Om Young seriously. He said that, what I just said, several times in commencement addresses. And I believe he really means that. And President Kim has rubbed shoulders a lot over many years with industry, but also with leaders in government and academia. So all these stakeholders are part of education for the 21st century. So I appeal, I urge, I beg all of you to engage with this. And if you find yourself in the position of petitioning the president for a waiver, you know, to not use flipped learning approaches, I guess I'd like to have a conversation with any faculty that are in that boat, because my reading of it is that flipped learning is really much broader than that. I shared an article from the Stanford Quarterly Alumni magazine where it's a Nobel laureate in physics. He subjected himself to this test a year ago or so at Stanford, and they had some younger faculty teaching with a flipped classroom, flipped learning, active learning engagement, if you will, approach. And the learning outcomes, they beat out the Nobel laureate who's using the standard lecture model. Another thing, I encourage all of you to browse Coursera, edX, or Udacity, and take a look at what Google is offering online and some other companies, you know, in effect, MOOCs, free online courses, and just look at what's there. I think that is a source of answers, and eventually our new website will link to the best of these other web-based resources. That's another thing. I think let's not look at any old school or university anywhere that's doing this. Let's try to find out the 3, 4, or 5 top players in the whole world, benchmark what they're doing. That would be my hope for this.
How did you begin your ideas? I mean, yeah, when you began thinking about this software.
So that's a good question. What actually, as a PhD student, I was teaching, assigned to teach a number of classes, and I inherited one from an instructor who was retiring, and he used group projects in his classroom, and they were very, very unstructured, which I was not comfortable with. I'm not very comfortable with. It just wasn't very comfortable for me. And basically what wound up happening was I then took on that class the following semester. I made some changes, but I didn't. But one of the things that I kept in place was using reflection paper. So I was basically helping the first time, and then the second time around I was actually using it. And the mechanism, sort of the assessment mechanism and support mechanism for the students was reflection papers. And at the end of that semester, I realized that while they are very helpful for the students to develop an understanding, potentially, if it's done right, they can be very helpful to sort of develop that reflection. They did not help me as an instructor to understand what was actually going on in those groups. And first of all, I wound up with a lot of people telling me about the weather and telling me about what they liked about Bloomington or whatever, just stuff that was not at all what I was asking about. Because, and even when they approached it, they weren't very reflective, and they weren't telling me the information that I needed to actually understand what was happening in those groups. And so I started exploring and looking for other options, and I landed on an article by Tucker and Reynolds. I forget their first names, but for me it was particularly important because they were using what I based this on. They were using some self-and peer assessment that was done regularly. I don't know whether they were doing it, using sort of a zero-sum game type of approach, and they were trying to use it summatively to define grades ultimately. And so I started taking that forward, and part of it was that not just I wanted to know the information, but I also wanted my students to know that I wanted the information. And I've actually gotten very positive responses on that as well. I asked one student about something. He was going through some rough times. I have no idea what those rough times were, but I reached out to him because it was coming in clear as day in the reports. It was saying that he was having he was struggling, and I reached out to him, and he said, "Yeah, I'm actually having some personal issues. I'll get my act together." He says, "But thank you for noticing. Thank you for caring and noticing," and that felt really, really good. I will never forget that. Just the fact that, and I know that he responded well. I know that he put in his effort. I'm sure he was going through some difficult time. I don't know but he did pick up his act. I don't know whether he was going to anyway. But I'd like to say that I'd like to feel like I played some kind of a part. I'd like to feel like that had an effect on them. Knowing that the instructor actually cares and that they are actually monitoring.
Micah, I've got, obviously, this is good because you're passionate about what you're doing. I have a suggestion for one change in your slide. You've got, why should we do this? Preparation for your post-academic life. I think we should try to avoid that term of academic or post-academic because I think it's awfully close to the old idea of the academia and the brick and mortar ivory tower. You have your 4-year degree. We threw that model out. We're throwing that model out here in terms of, if you really read President Kim's vision, I encourage you to read and reread it, listen to what Dr. Ohl is saying, and to come back to, it makes me feel old to say this, but I did teach for 15 years at major research universities in the US, but also Yonsei here and the National University of Singapore, back in the 20th century, before the internet, before this all happened. Then I took this 17-year hiatus to work at, which I'm glad I did. But when I came back to teaching in 2012 down at KAIST, it really hit me. It's a very personal thing. Everything is different primarily because everything is digital. But most importantly, and I'm sure you've all experienced this in looking at your course evaluations at the end of the semester, or anyone, let me put it this way, anyone who's still using a traditional lecture method has most likely gotten feedback from students that reveals something that should not really be surprising. These millennials that form our undergraduate and even increasingly graduate students, some of what I talk about that's is part of my life, that I got passionate about, is still relevant, but it's ancient history to them. It happened before they were born. But if you lecture, and I've seen this not in my own evaluations, but looking over the way that students evaluate teaching for all of our faculty, they don't respond. This is a big generalization, so forgive me, but the students don't respond well to lectures unless those lectures are meticulously prepared, exciting, with very, very judicious use of slides. Not death by PowerPoint, with slides full of text, but with visuals, with embedded video. It's a whole different mode of learning, mainly due to something we've talked a lot about. Mark presented on this, you know, the changed media environment. So, you know, from that broad perspective, this should be a really easy thing to institute here at SUNY Korea. Actually, and thank you for an excellent presentation today. I don't mean to be getting off off topic. In fact, I don't think it's off topic at all, because increasingly we're going to need programs like the one you're developing. We're going to need a certain amount of IT support, but what's most important is we're going to have the majority of our faculty, hopefully the large majority, realizing that this is an opportunity and it's kind of an open door. It's not something that's being instituted punitively, like you do this flipped learning approach, or you know, we'll find someone else, that type of thing. It's not what we're getting at all.
Since we're running a bit over, I'd just like to close with one comment. First, thank you very much. It's very interesting. I wish I knew more about CoLab earlier. It's a very interesting idea. And I want to say, in the history of what's called industrial sociology, this gets back to your point where you said the student was simply happy about you noticing. Notice it's not that you had data of what to do about it. Simply the fact of testing them was the social issue that made people perform better or be more interested in you and your teaching. To relate what was done, this was like 1955 study. I think it was on GE workers, General Electric workers. And they were trying to think about it very behaviorally. Maybe people work better under certain lighting. So they spent all this, you heard about this, just to summarize that, for other people who may not know, they just tried to manipulate the lighting, you know, colors as well as the intensities, and the data they got back about productivity and you know, subjective view about work, it always was positive whatever they did. And they finally, you know, you think this is a very positivist view of science. Like, we finally have to ask somebody what they subjectively think about it. And so it's they thought they were really going to get data exclusively about that. Okay. And they said, well, thank you for spending so much of your time trying to figure out what's a good environment for us. It had nothing to do with the lighting. It was the fact that socially they were being aided, they thought, in some way, that somebody was taking the time to try to make them have a better environment. And I think maybe flipped learning is a lot like that. Like, no matter what we do, hopefully, the fact that we're trying and that we are creating more feedback relationships will end up positively having a separate effect versus the techniques we used. Even.
First of all, you're talking about, just to make me feel good about me, you're talking about Hawthorne, right?
I think so. I forget the name of him.
I think so.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, you know, to piggyback on that, I agree with you. I think that taking a deliberate approach to delivering the content, and taking a deliberate approach to thinking about what we want our students to achieve and how we can help them to achieve those goals, I think is really, really important. I think that that's basically what you were getting at. You know, I mean, if we're paying attention to them and we are taking the interest, you know, not mailing it in, but actually taking the interest, taking the time to be deliberate in what we're actually doing, I think that
well, let me interject one thing. You said we're not just the techniques or technology. The technology part, it's really important to remember. It's coding, it's websites, it's recording your lectures and all of that stuff. But it's also, very importantly, the digital revolution has resulted in this explosion of content. That's why there are MOOCs, massive open online, but just published scientific articles, it's exponential. I've attended several sessions one by Elsevier down at KAIST, and one more recently by Taylor and Francis, on what's going on in publishing and the actual content. So the fundamental things that university professors do the central mission of the university is affected not just narrowly because of the digital technology, but because of all this profusion of content, the media that mediate, whether you're in a campus or outside a campus, the shift toward lifelong learning. I mean, the place where education takes place, the media through which it takes place, the content that can be conveyed, everything has shifted. It's really a broad transformation. So, I mean, it's sometimes easy to sort of oversimplify this, but I think that it really, the reason for the Flipped Learning Initiative at SUNY Korea, it's going to be our reaction to this revolutionary change, the revolution that's reshaping industry, government, economics, but also, you know, education. So this is our response to that, and I think that what I hope is that we will get, if a professor sends a request to President Kim to waive this, that they will be able to make a persuasive case. This gets back to the point, persuasive case that they have a method that they claim is not really active learning or flipped learning that's effective in encouraging learning and engagement. So it's very thought-provoking, all of this for me. And thanks.
Yeah,
thanks
a lot of
to
ideas.
all
Thank
of
you everyone for coming too.
Coming, yeah.
Thank you.
So is this our last